Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy this story.
For as long as I can remember, my 100 acres of land, tucked away deep in a mountain valley, was my ultimate escape, my quiet sanctuary. It wasn't just land. It was a promise I'd made to myself, a future I'd painstakingly carved out over decades. My goal, the one that kept me going through countless long workdays and stressful business decisions, was to retire at 50 and live there full-time. That land was the cornerstone of my entire retirement plan, the very heartbeat of my future. Every year, without fail, I'd make the pilgrimage. Usually, it was a solid month, sometimes even two, during the late spring or early summer. It was a ritual, the long drive out of the city, the gradual shedding of stress with every mile, the way the air started to smell cleaner, sharper, as I climbed higher into the foothills. Then, the final winding dirt road, usually passable but sometimes needing a bit of careful navigation after heavy rains. And finally, the moment the cabin came into view, small and unassuming against the vast backdrop of the mountains. That first breath of mountain air, free from exhaust and city grime, was always like a cleansing. I'd spend my days hiking the trails I knew like the back of my hand, fishing in the lake, sometimes just sitting on the small porch, watching the light play on the water, listening to nothing but the wind in the trees and the calls of the distant birds. It was pure, unadulterated peace. Last year, though, everything was different. It was supposed to be my grand farewell to the working world, my final year of pushing the business to its peak before handing it off. The sale had been more complicated, more demanding than I'd anticipated. Late nights, endless meetings, due diligence that felt like it would never end. There simply wasn't a spare moment to break away. Every ounce of my energy was poured into the transition, making sure my legacy, the company I built from the ground up, was left in good hands. It was a bittersweet period, exhilaration at the prospect of freedom, mixed with the exhaustion of the final sprint. So, my annual retreat to the cabin had to be sacrificed. I told myself it was just for 1 year, a minor delay. This year, I promised, this year I'd make up for it. And I had. Technically, as of 3 months ago, I was officially retired. The business was sold, the papers signed, the last checks clear. I was free to embark on my new life, free to finally live out the dream I'd nurtured for so long. It's really important for you to understand just how isolated this place was. When I say there was nothing around me, I mean it. I'd trek for miles without seeing another soul. Occasionally, if I went far enough along the old logging trails, I might stumble across a very rough, unmaintained dirt track that led to a couple of other extremely remote cabins, maybe 5 or 10 miles away, owned by other folks who sought the same kind of solitude. But those were few and far between, and their owners were even less frequent visitors than I was. My valley was practically untouched, a genuine wilderness. The nearest paved road was a good 2-hour drive, and the closest town, barely more than a general store and a gas station, was another 30 minutes beyond that. Civilization felt like a distant rumor out there, a concept that barely applied. I still, to this day, can't pinpoint when this so-called HOA materialized, or who even thought it was a good idea to inflict such a thing on this untouched wilderness. Even now, after everything, I still don't see any housing development that would justify a homeowners association anywhere close to where my land used to be. Not a single subdivision, no tract homes, nothing that looks like a community. The idea itself felt utterly preposterous, like a joke played by some distant, out-of-touch bureaucracy. As I got closer, the sign came into focus, and the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Bold, elegant script, clearly professionally done. The Last Pine Homeowners Resort. Below it, in slightly smaller letters, a tagline, "Your sanctuary awaits." My sanctuary, a resort. Here, my foot instinctively eased off the gas pedal, and my truck slowed to a crawl. This couldn't be right. My cabin was just beyond this point, and there was no resort, no homeowners anything, just my isolated valley. I got back in the truck, my mind racing. I pushed the pedal, driving slowly through the open gate, the gravel crunching under my tires. The road continued to be well maintained, smooth, almost too pristine for this wilderness. And then, as I rounded the bend, the trees thinned, and the world shifted. My breath caught in my throat. a gasp that turned into a choked sound. I stared, my mind struggling to process the scene. It was like looking at a photograph of a place I knew intimately, but with a massive, inexplicable chunk of it digitally removed and replaced with something alien. The familiar shoreline where I'd launched my small rowboat was now a neatly paved path. The old, gnarled pine where I always tied my fishing line was gone. The wild blueberries I used to pick were replaced by ornamental shrubs. The silence, the deep, abiding silence I cherished, was now punctuated by the distant hum of what sounded like air conditioning units and, even more jarringly, the faint, tinny thud of pop music coming from one of the cabins. A wave of pure, unadulterated fury washed over me, so intense it made my vision blur for a second. This wasn't just a mistake. This was an invasion, a hostile takeover. Someone had stolen my life, my future, my very identity, and replaced it with a commercialized parody. I brought the truck to a complete stop, right in the middle of what was clearly a new, paved road that circled the lake. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to take a deep, ragged breath, trying to calm the roaring in my ears. I needed answers. As I sat there, a woman emerged from the cabin closest to where my old place had been. She was dressed in expensive-looking hiking gear, complete with a designer water bottle clipped to her belt. She had a small, fluffy dog on a leash and was heading towards the new dock, presumably for a morning stroll. She glanced up, saw my truck, and offered a bright, almost too friendly smile. "Good morning," she called out, her voice clear and cheerful, completely oblivious to the volcano erupting inside me. "Lovely day for a walk, isn't it?" I just stared at her, my mouth dry. I couldn't speak. The sheer normalcy of her greeting, the casual way she occupied the space where my dream had lived, was almost unbearable. "Can I help you?" she asked, her smile faltering slightly as she registered the bewildered, probably enraged, look on my face. Her hand instinctively tightened on the dog's leash. I finally managed to unstick my tongue from the roof of my mouth. "My cabin," I croaked, pointing a trembling finger at the monstrosity that now stood where my sanctuary had been. "Where is my cabin?" Her eyebrows went up, and a faint frown creased her forehead. "Your cabin?" she repeated, a hint of suspicion entering her voice. "I'm not sure what you mean. This is the Last Pine Homeowners Resort. All these cabins belong to the resort or are privately owned by members of the HOA. She swept her hand in an expansive gesture that encompassed the entire circle of buildings, the lake, even the very air I was breathing. The woman's friendly demeanor evaporated completely. Her eyes narrowed, and her expression hardened. She pulled the little dog closer to her side. "Look, mister, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but this property is private. It's owned by the Last Pine Homeowners Association. You're trespassing." Trespassing? The word felt like a physical assault. "I've owned this land for 30 years. My cabin was here last year. What happened to it? What is this resort?" A man, presumably her husband, now appeared on the deck of the giant cabin, drawn by the raised voices. He was broad-shouldered, with a stern face and an expensive-looking coffee mug in his hand. He surveyed the scene, his gaze sweeping from me to the woman, then to my truck, which was still blocking the newly paved road. "Is there a problem, darling?" he called out, his voice deeper, more authoritative. "Just some crackpot claiming he owns the land," she called back, her voice laced with disdain. "Says his cabin was here." She rolled her eyes at me. The man descended the steps, his expression unreadable, though his posture conveyed a definite air of irritation. "Sir," he said, addressing me directly, his voice calm but firm, "this is private property. Are you lost?" He remained impassive. "I think you're mistaken. All the parcels around this lake, and extending several miles in every direction, are under the ownership of the Last Pine Homeowners Association. We acquired all the necessary titles and permits years ago. Perhaps you have the wrong valley?" He sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Look, if you have some sort of claim, you'll need to take it up with the HOA's legal department, not harass residents. This is a private community. We have security." He gestured vaguely towards a new-looking security camera mounted on a tall pole at the edge of the woods. My head spun. Security? HOA's legal department? Permits acquired years ago? This was insane. I hadn't received a single notification, not a single letter, no offers to buy, no legal challenges, nothing. How could an entire resort, 24 luxury cabins, a paved road, and a sign declaring HOA ownership materialize on my land without my knowledge. It defied belief. It defied logic. It defied the law. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling. "I'm calling the sheriff," I declared, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. The man chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Go right ahead. They're well aware of our operations here. They're very supportive of the new development and the positive impact it's had on the local economy." The word stung. Local economy? This was a wilderness. What local economy? My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of the deception. My cabin, gone. My land, stolen. My future, obliterated. I did call the sheriff. I explained the situation, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. The dispatcher listened patiently, then put me on hold. After a long minute, a man with a gruff voice came on the line. "Sheriff Thompson here. What seems to be the trouble?" I reiterated my story, trying to keep my voice steady, to sound rational despite the earthquake shaking my world. "I've owned this land, 100 acres, for over 30 years. I just arrived, and my cabin is gone. There's a resort here now. They're claiming it's theirs." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt heavier than it should have. "Sir," Sheriff Thompson finally said, his tone flat, "we're very familiar with the Last Pine Homeowners Resort. It's a legitimate, approved development. All the necessary permits and land transfers were handled legally through the county. There's no record of your ownership, not in recent memory, anyway." "No record?" I shouted into the phone, utterly incredulous. "That's impossible. I have the deed. I have all my property tax records. I've paid taxes on that land for 3 decades. "Well, sir, according to county records, the entire acreage around Last Pine Lake was legally acquired by the Last Pine Homeowners Association 3 years ago. If you believe there's been an error, you'll need to contact the county clerk's office and then seek legal counsel. We can't intervene in a civil land dispute." His voice was firm, unyielding. "And frankly, sir, the residents are complaining about you blocking the road. I suggest you move along. We don't want any further disturbances out there. Sir, you are on private property. Move your vehicle. If you refuse, I'll have to send a deputy out there, and you'll be cited for trespassing." The line went dead. The man from the cabin, the one who'd identified himself as a resident, was now walking towards my truck. His arms crossed, a look of distinct impatience on his face. "Are you going to move, or do we need to call security?" I looked at him, then at the sprawling cabin that sat on the exact spot where my small, beloved cabin had once stood. I looked at the lake, now ringed by these symbols of opulent invasion. The peaceful quiet was gone, replaced by the faint hum of human activity, the sterile perfection of a planned community. My stomach churned. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that this was just the beginning. This wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. This was something far more sinister, a grand deception that had already consumed my world. I had to understand how. I had to fight. My sanctuary, my future, had been brazenly seized, and I was going to find out who was behind it and make them answer. The thought of driving away, of simply leaving, was unthinkable. This was my land, and no resort, no HOA, no false records, was going to take it without a monumental struggle. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the man's impatient glare burning into me. My mind, usually sharp and decisive, felt like a tangled mess of broken glass. The sheriff's dismissal echoed in my ears, a cruel refrain. "Move your vehicle. If you refuse, I'll have to send a deputy out there, and you'll be cited for trespassing." Trespassing, on my own land. The sheer injustice of it felt like a physical blow. With a profound, weary sigh that felt like it dragged my very soul out of my chest, I slowly eased my foot off the brake. The tires crunched on the pristine gravel, pulling away from the scene of my stolen life. I drove slowly, circling the lake, each luxury cabin a fresh wound. The polished wood, the manicured lawns, the distant laughter from one of the decks. It was all a grotesque parody of the wilderness I cherished. I noticed little details now. A community clubhouse with a gleaming swimming pool, tennis courts peeking through a stand of trees, even a small, fancy marina with several sleek motorboats tied up. This wasn't just a handful of cabins. This was a fully fledged, well-funded operation. As I exited the resort gate and turned back onto the now improved access road, I looked in my rearview mirror. The elegant carved sign, the Last Pine Homeowners Resort, seemed to mock me. I drove for what felt like hours, even though it was probably only 20 minutes, before I finally found a wide enough spot to pull over. I killed the engine. The sudden silence in the truck was deafening, a stark contrast to the buzzing in my head. My hands were still shaking. I stared out the windshield at the familiar, unyielding trees, trying to make sense of the absurdity. How could this happen? How could an entire piece of land, 100 acres that I'd legally owned for 30 years, simply vanish from the records? It defied everything I understood about property law, about justice, about common decency. My first thought was that this had to be some colossal mistake, a clerical error of epic proportions. But the sheriff's calm, confident dismissal, and the residents' almost rehearsed certainty suggested something far more deliberate. I pulled out my old, worn leather wallet. Inside, tucked carefully behind my driver's license, were photocopies of my original deed, along with the property tax receipts from the last 5 years. I'd always kept them there, a habit I picked up from my dad, who always said you could never be too careful. I unfolded the deed, the old paper crinkling softly. My name, the legal description of the land, the date of purchase, all there, in black and white, and the tax receipts, showing consistent payments, year after year, to the county. It was all there, proof, irrefutable proof. Yet, the sheriff had said, no record. That was the phrase that kept replaying in my mind. No record of your ownership, not in recent memory, anyway. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. I knew I couldn't stay here. I needed a plan. The county clerk's office, that was the first stop. They were the keepers of the records. If anyone could explain this, it would be them. And after that, a lawyer, a good lawyer, one who understood land disputes, who wasn't afraid to go up against a well-financed organization. I started the truck and drove, the initial shock giving way to a cold, hard resolve. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, so I pushed on, heading straight for the nearest town with a county seat. The drive felt endless, the darkness outside the cab a mirror to the bleakness in my mind. The next morning, after a restless night in a cheap motel, I was at the county courthouse doors precisely when they opened. The county clerk's office was a bustling place, filled with the quiet murmur of people conducting official business. I waited in line, my old deed clutched in my hand, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. Finally, it was my turn. A woman with weary eyes and a name tag that read, Brenda, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "I need to inquire about a parcel of land. I own 100 acres in the Last Pine Valley, parcel ID." I rattled off the number printed on my deed. "I was just out there, and my cabin is gone. There's a resort built on my property, and the sheriff told me there's no record of my ownership." I laid my deed and tax receipts on the counter. Brenda picked up the deed, her eyes scanning it. She squinted. "This looks old," she muttered, more to herself than to me. She typed the parcel ID into her computer, her fingers moving slowly. The screen refreshed, and she frowned. This parcel, according to our digitized records, was transferred to the Last Pine Homeowners Association 3 years ago. There's no current record of your name associated with it." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible," I said, leaning forward. "I have the original deed right here. And these are my tax receipts, going back 30 years. I've paid property taxes every single year without fail." She pushed the papers back towards me. "Sir, I can only go by what's in the system. The deed recorded for that parcel, dated 2 years, 11 months, and 5 days ago, shows a sale from a John Doe to the Last Pine Homeowners Association. It was signed, notarized, and properly recorded." "John Doe?" I spluttered. "My name isn't John Doe, and I never sold it. I never even knew about this." Brenda sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Look, I understand this is upsetting, but property transfers happen all the time. If you believe this is fraudulent, you'll need to speak with the county assessor's office about the valuation and then consult an attorney about a civil suit. Our records are what they are." She gestured to the computer screen, as if the glowing pixels held ultimate, unquestionable authority. "Can I see the original paperwork?" I asked, my voice tight. "The actual deed they filed, the one signed by John Doe." She hesitated. "Those are usually archived. It'll take some time to pull it. We're very busy." "I'll wait," I said, my voice firm. I'm not leaving until I see the paperwork that claims I sold my land. She gave me a long, evaluating look, then finally relented. Fine, she snapped, jotting down a number on a slip of paper. Take a seat. This could be a while. I sat in a hard plastic chair, every minute feeling like an hour. The bureaucratic hum of the office, the rustle of papers, the distant clatter of a printer, all grated on my nerves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Brenda called my number. Here it is, she said, sliding a thick file across the counter. The recorded deed and the associated paperwork. This isn't my signature, I told Brenda, my voice low and dangerous. I've never seen this man. John Doe. This is fraudulent. And look at the parcel ID. It's been altered. Brenda merely shrugged. Sir, it was processed according to procedure at the time. The notary is licensed. We can't question every document. If you believe it's fraud, that's a legal matter. I pressed on. What about my tax payments? I've been paying taxes on this parcel ID for decades. How could it be transferred if I was paying taxes? She looked at my tax records again. It looks like your tax payments for that parcel ID ceased 3 years ago. The new parcel ID, the one transferred to the HOA, started having taxes paid by them from that point on. It appears there was a reassignment of the parcel ID by the assessor's office around that time. A reassignment? This was getting deeper. It wasn't just a forged deed. It was a manipulation of county records, a rerouting of property IDs. This was a sophisticated operation. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase my ownership from existence. My stomach twisted with a sickening feeling. This wasn't some random error. It was a deliberate, intricate plot. I thanked Brenda, gathering my papers, the copied deed and tax records feeling heavier than lead in my hands. The next step was clear. A lawyer. Finding a lawyer who specialized in complex land disputes, especially ones involving potential fraud and large organizations, wasn't easy. I started calling firms, explaining my bizarre story over and over. Many dismissed me outright. Some offered condolences, but no help. Others just sounded overwhelmed by the scope of what I was describing. But then, after 3 days of relentless searching, I found Melissa Jenkins. Her firm wasn't flashy, tucked away in an unassuming office building in a slightly larger town 2 hours away, but her online profile boasted a strong track record in property litigation and a reputation for being relentless. I managed to get an appointment for the following Monday. The waiting room was quiet, with an outdated copy of a gardening magazine on the table. When Melissa finally called me in, she was younger than I expected, probably in her late 30s, but her eyes held a sharp intelligence. She had a no-nonsense demeanor, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a simple, dark suit. Mr. Peterson, she said, extending a firm hand across her desk. Thanks for coming in. Your summary on the phone was intriguing. Tell me everything, from the beginning. I laid out my story, slowly, deliberately, trying to articulate the crushing feeling of disbelief and violation. I showed her my original deed, my tax receipts, and the fraudulent deed copy I'd obtained from the county clerk's office. I explained about John Doe, the altered parcel ID, the sheriff's dismissive response, and the resort now standing on my land. Melissa listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. This is certainly unusual, Mr. Peterson, she said, picking up my original deed and examining it closely. The records you have here, if authentic, clearly establish your ownership. And the tax payments corroborate that. The fact that the county records show a transfer to the Last Pine Homeowners Association via John Doe and a reassigned parcel ID, all within the last 3 years, is highly suspicious. She tapped her pen against her lip. This sounds like a sophisticated land grab. They didn't just forge a deed, they managed to manipulate the county's record-keeping system. That takes either extreme cunning or someone on the inside. Or both. My heart gave a jolt. Someone on the inside? You mean at the county office? It's a possibility we can't ignore, she replied. For a reassignment of a parcel ID to occur without your knowledge, especially when you were actively paying taxes on it, and for a John Doe deed to be filed successfully, it suggests a serious breakdown, or perhaps a deliberate bypass, of standard procedures. And the timing, right when you were consumed with your business sale and absent from the property, isn't a coincidence. So, what do we do? I asked, a flicker of hope starting to ignite in my chest. First, she explained, we need to secure certified copies of every single document related to the Last Pine Homeowners Association's acquisition of your property, and all surrounding parcels they claim to own. We'll need to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Every signature, every notary stamp, every filing date. We'll cross-reference it with your original documents. She continued, we'll also need to investigate this John Doe. Who is he? Is he a real person? A shell entity? A fabricated identity? We'll need to subpoena the HOA for all their internal documents related to this acquisition. And we'll need to put a stop to any further development on the land immediately, if possible, by filing a temporary restraining order or an injunction. The road ahead sounded long, arduous, and expensive. Can we win? I asked, my voice betraying the anxiety I felt. Melissa met my gaze, her expression serious. Mr. Peterson, property law is complex. But if your original documents are legitimate, and we can prove fraud in the subsequent transfer and record manipulation, then yes, we have a very strong case. It won't be easy. Large HOAs usually have deep pockets and aggressive legal teams. They won't just roll over. This will be a fight. I have savings from the business sale, I told her, my jaw setting. Whatever it takes. Over the next few weeks, the legal machinery slowly, deliberately, began to turn. Melissa was meticulous. She sent a team of paralegals to the county clerk's office, not just to pull the obvious documents, but to dig through the archives, to look for any anomalies, any missing links, any records that might have been misplaced. What they found was disturbing. The county records, initially so unyielding, started to reveal cracks under intense scrutiny. The original John Doe deed, which had been presented as the legal transfer document, was indeed filed. But a deep dive into the assessor's office revealed that the reassignment of my parcel ID had been done by a low-level clerk who had since retired abruptly. The justification for the reassignment was listed as clerical error correction, but there was no original error documented to correct. It was a phantom correction, designed to create a clean slate for the new, fraudulent deed. We also discovered that the notary public who had stamped the John Doe deed had a history of questionable transactions. Melissa explained that some notaries, especially those working independently, could be compromised, signing off on documents without truly verifying the identities of the signatories. It wasn't direct proof of conspiracy, but it added to the growing mountain of circumstantial evidence. Then came the formal letter from Melissa's office to the Last Pine Homeowners Association. It was a terse, legal document demanding immediate cessation of all construction and development on the property, and declaring my rightful ownership based on the original deed. It also outlined our intent to file a lawsuit for quiet title and damages. The response came swift and cold. A letter from a massive, prestigious law firm in the city, representing the HOA. Their letter was dismissive, almost condescending. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the Last Pine Homeowners Association was the rightful, legal owner of the land, based on duly recorded deeds and permits. It accused me of attempting to extort money from their legitimate development and threatened a countersuit for frivolous litigation and defamation if I did not cease my unfounded claims immediately. They're playing hardball, Melissa said, her jaw tight as she read the letter aloud in her office. This firm doesn't mess around. They're trying to intimidate us. It's working, I admitted, my voice heavy. The sheer scale of their legal power, the confidence with which they dismissed my legitimate claim, was disheartening. How do you fight something like this? With facts, Mr. Peterson, Melissa replied, her eyes firm. And with a solid legal strategy. Their confidence is built on the assumption that their fabricated paper trail is impenetrable. But we're finding the weaknesses. The John Doe figure is our first big lead. We need to expose him, or the fact that he doesn't exist, and how his name came to be on a deed to your property. The more we dug, the more layers of deception we uncovered. There was a faint paper trail, almost impossible to find, that showed a small, unheard-of realty company had supposedly facilitated the John Doe transaction. When Melissa's team tried to investigate this realty company, they found it had been dissolved less than a month after the Last Pine deed was filed. Its listed address turned out to be a mail forwarding service, and the listed contact person, a phantom. It was a dead end designed to be one. The entire scheme reeked of careful planning, of people who knew exactly how to exploit loopholes and manipulate official systems. The initial dismissal by the sheriff, the confident residents, the county clerk's weary shrug, it all began to make a twisted kind of sense. Someone powerful and connected had orchestrated this. I started spending my days in Melissa's office, poring over documents, recounting details, trying to remember anything, any small interaction or piece of paper from 3 years ago that might shed light on this darkness. My life had been turned upside down. The dream of quiet retirement was replaced by the grinding reality of a legal battle that felt overwhelming. My 100 acres, once a place of peace, was now the epicenter of a war. They've been quietly establishing themselves, Melissa observed one afternoon, pointing to a complex flowchart she'd drawn out, connecting shell companies and dates. Buying up little bits of land, creating a legal framework, then hitting your prime acreage when you weren't looking. This John Doe isn't a person. I'm almost certain. He's a name pulled out of a hat, signed by someone with a forged notary stamp. The county system was either complicit or willfully ignorant. The phrase, willfully ignorant, chilled me to the bone. It meant that even some of the public servants, those entrusted with upholding the law, might have looked the other way. The scale of the deception, the sheer audacity of it, was almost unbelievable. But the proof, slowly and painstakingly, was emerging from the shadows. This was going to be a long, drawn-out slugfest, and I had to be ready for every punch. The legal fight quickly consumed my life. Weeks blurred into months, each day a new hurdle, a fresh layer of frustration. Melissa Jenkins, my lawyer, proved to be exactly the tenacious fighter one needed. She had a knack for digging into the dark corners of officialdom, and she set her team to work immediately, focusing on the two main weaknesses in the HOA's story: the phantom, John Doe, and the suspicious reassignment of my parcel ID into county records. Their first target was Beverly Higgins, the notary public whose stamp graced the John Doe deed. It wasn't easy to find her. She'd moved several states away and was trying to live a quiet life, clearly wanting nothing to do with the mess she'd left behind. Melissa's private investigator eventually tracked her down, and after some careful negotiation, including the very real threat of legal action against her for complicity in fraud, Beverly reluctantly agreed to cooperate. In a tense phone call, Beverly admitted to Melissa and me that she had been approached by a man named Mr. Thorne. He presented what looked like a driver's license for John Doe, but she confessed she hadn't looked closely. She was getting paid handsomely for each rapid-fire notarization and, she said, was too overwhelmed by the volume and pressure to verify identities thoroughly. She'd stamped the deed, she said, because Mr. Thorne had told her it was urgent and important. It was the first solid crack in their meticulously built wall of deception. Next, Melissa subpoenaed Martha Vandermeer, the former county clerk who had handled the mysterious parcel ID reassignment. Martha was terrified, an older woman clearly out of her depth in the face of legal scrutiny. In her deposition, she tearfully explained that the request for the reassignment hadn't come through normal channels. Instead, a senior official in the county planning department, Mr. Harrison, had personally pushed the paperwork through, citing a special directive and critical development timelines. Martha, under pressure from a superior, had simply processed it, believing it to be a legitimate, high-priority administrative correction for a major economic project. It was clear she was a pawn, but her testimony confirmed an inside job, a deliberate manipulation of the county's own systems. With these pieces, Melissa began to connect the dots. The Mr. Thorne, Beverly mentioned, and Mr. Harrison, from the county planning department. These names started appearing in our investigation into the Last Pine Homeowners Association's true structure. It turned out the HOA wasn't just a collection of vacationing homeowners. It was a front for a powerful real estate conglomerate called Summit Peak Holdings. And the two men at the top of Summit Peak Holdings were Malcolm Thorne, the aggressive developer, and Reginald Vance, a shadowy financier known for his cutthroat business dealings. It all started to click. Thorne was the one who had paid Beverly Higgins to sign off on the fraudulent deed. Vance was the money behind it all, the one with the political connections. And Mr. Harrison? He was a longtime associate of Vance's, who conveniently retired to a lucrative consulting job with a firm connected to Summit Peak Holdings shortly after my property was acquired. The entire scheme was a carefully orchestrated land grab, designed to exploit my absence and turn my pristine valley into their profitable resort. My 100 acres, with its prime lakefront, was simply the crown jewel in their cynical development. As we gathered more evidence, the pressure from the HOA's legal team became intense. Their initial dismissive letters escalated into aggressive motions, designed to bury us in paperwork and exhaust my dwindling funds. They filed motions to dismiss our case, claiming it was baseless and an attempt to extort money. They demanded extensive discovery of my personal finances, my entire life laid bare, hoping to find something, anything, to discredit me. They're playing psychological warfare now, Melissa explained, her jaw tight as she reviewed another stack of their filings. They want to drain your resolve, make you walk away. Then came the escalation of threats. First, anonymous phone calls with distorted voices, warning me to drop it. Then, the tires on my truck were slashed while I was at the motel. And then, a brick was thrown through Melissa's office window one weekend, with a chilling note wrapped around it, "Walk away from the pines." Melissa was furious. She immediately reported it to the police, but she knew, and I knew, that these people were too careful to leave direct evidence. "They're getting desperate, Mr. Peterson," she said, picking up the brick fragment. "That means we're hitting them where it hurts." Despite the fear, the intimidation only hardened my resolve. I wouldn't back down. Not after all this, not after they tried to steal my future. Melissa filed a motion for a preliminary injunction to halt all construction at the resort. After a tense hearing, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. It was a significant victory, stopping their relentless building, but it came with a heavy cost. The HOA's lawyers immediately appealed and demanded an astronomically high bond from me to cover their potential losses if the injunction was upheld, and they eventually won the case. It was a clear tactic to financially crush me. "They're trying to price you out of the fight," Melissa said, frustrated. "This bond amount is punitive. My carefully saved retirement funds were now being poured into this legal black hole." It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing my future was being sacrificed to fight against those who had tried to steal it. But I told Melissa, whatever it takes. My dreams were being ravaged, but I would not let them win without a brutal, public fight. The courtroom awaited, and it was clear this would be a battle for everything I had left. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker on the first day of the trial. Every sound, every movement, seemed amplified. Across the aisle, Malcolm Thorne sat next to Ms. Eleanor Vance, the HOA's lead counsel. Thorne's gaze flickered to me, a smugness in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Reginald Vance, the money man, was conspicuously absent, clearly preferring to let his high-priced legal team fight his battles. I gripped the armrest of my chair, focusing on Melissa's calm presence beside me. My turn on the stand came quickly. I recounted the story of my land, my cabin, the dream of retirement. I spoke of the shock of seeing the resort, the disbelief that my home was simply gone. I presented my deed, my tax receipts, the irrefutable evidence of my 30 years of ownership. I tried to convey the depth of the violation, the sense of my future being torn away. Ms. Vance's cross-examination was brutal. She tried to paint me as an absentee owner, someone who had simply forgotten about his property. "Mr. Peterson, you admit you didn't visit your property for an entire year prior to this alleged discovery. Is that correct?" "I was selling my business," I stated, trying to keep my voice steady. It was an all-consuming process, but I never stopped paying taxes on my land. "Ah, the taxes," she purred, a patronizing smile on her face. "Isn't it true, Mr. Peterson, that your tax payments for this specific parcel ceased 3 years ago, when the Last Pine Homeowners Association legally acquired the property?" "My payments never ceased," I retorted. "They were deliberately rerouted. I have proof of every payment. Mere copies, Mr. Peterson, easily fabricated. The county records, which are the official documents, say otherwise." She tried to imply I was either senile or trying to defraud them. I held my ground, clinging to Melissa's advice. The next witness was supposed to be Beverly Higgins, the notary. But just before she was called, Melissa was pulled aside by the bailiff. She returned to our table, her face drawn. "Beverly's refusing to testify," Melissa whispered, her voice tight with frustration. "Says she's too scared. Apparently, she received a rather graphic visit last night. Someone left a dead rabbit on her doorstep with a note. She's completely broken down. A cold knot formed in my stomach. They were playing dirty, very dirty. It was an illegal tactic, designed to silence a crucial witness. Malcolm Thorne, across the room, watched me, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. He knew. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely audible. Melissa's eyes narrowed, as steely resolve replacing her frustration. We adapt? This only tells me we're close to something big. They wouldn't risk this if they weren't desperate. The HOA's team then pulled their first major twist. During their presentation of their acquired permits, Ms. Vance dramatically introduced a document she called a quitclaim of abandonment. It was an old-looking, faded piece of paper, supposedly signed by someone named J. Doe, a slightly different variation of John Doe, dating back over 20 years. The document claimed that the owner of Last Pine Valley Parcel 7, which allegedly included my specific property, had quitclaimed all rights and abandoned the land decades ago. This document, Ms. Vance declared to the judge, clearly shows that the previous owner of this specific segment of the property relinquished all claims long before Mr. Peterson even acquired his deed. This explains why Mr. Peterson's deed, which we believe to be based on an erroneous survey, does not reflect the true legal history of the land. It was a bold-faced lie, a retroactive fabrication designed to make it look like my claim was based on faulty initial ownership. It suggested that a piece of my land was never truly mine to begin with. I looked at Melissa, my mind reeling. How could they conjure something like that? Melissa, though momentarily surprised, quickly recovered. Your Honor, this is a clear attempt to introduce fraudulent, unsubstantiated evidence. This quitclaim has never been presented in discovery, and its authenticity is highly questionable. The judge allowed it to be entered for now, but noted Melissa's objection for further review. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. It felt like they were throwing everything they had at us. They're grasping at straws, Melissa murmured to me during a recess. That quitclaim is a desperate move, but it means we need to hit them harder. And hit them she did. When it was our turn again, Melissa called our surprise witness, Mr. Robert Miller, the forensic document examiner. The HOA's lawyers had no idea he was coming. The plaintiff calls Mr. Robert Miller, Melissa announced. A buzz went through the room. Miller, an unassuming man with sharp eyes, took the stand. Melissa had him methodically explain his process, the intricate science of handwriting analysis. Mr. Miller, Melissa asked, did you examine the signature of John Doe on the deed the Last Pine Homeowners Association recorded for your client's property? Yes, I did, Miller replied, his voice clear. He then presented large, blown-up images of the John Doe signature, alongside known writing samples from Malcolm Thorne. And what were your findings? Miller paused, then delivered the bombshell. Based on my extensive forensic analysis, it is my professional opinion that the signature on the Last Pine Homeowners Association deed, though disguised, exhibits significant, unique characteristics consistent with the known handwriting samples of Mr. Malcolm Thorne. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Malcolm Thorne's face went from smug to ashen, a flicker of raw panic in his eyes. Ms. Vance shot him a look of absolute fury. The judge, his expression unreadable, leaned forward. Ms. Vance erupted. Objection. This is outrageous. A baseless accusation. Your Honor, Melissa calmly countered. Mr. Miller is an expert witness. His testimony is based on scientific fact. The judge pounded his gavel. Order. Objection overruled. Mr. Miller, you may continue. Miller then calmly explained how subtle pressure points, unique flourishes, and specific letter formations pointed directly to Thorne. He then moved on to the so-called quitclaim of abandonment. And did you also examine the signature of J. Doe on the quitclaim document introduced by the defense? Melissa asked. I did, Miller confirmed. And again, with an extremely high degree of certainty, the signature on this document also exhibits characteristics consistent with the handwriting of Mr. Malcolm Thorne, albeit with an even greater attempt at disguise due to its age. The double blow landed like a physical punch. Thorne had not only forged the recent deed, but had seemingly concocted a phony historical document to underpin his fraudulent claim, backdated by decades. The sheer calculated deception of it all was staggering. But Melissa wasn't finished. She then introduced a meticulously compiled financial analysis prepared by another expert. This analysis showed a series of complex, untraceable payments flowing from a shell corporation controlled by Reginald Vance's Summit Peak Holdings to a private consulting firm, which then made large, unexplained payments directly into a personal account belonging to the recently retired county official, Mr. Harrison. This money, Melissa explained to the court, was disguised as a retirement bonus, but the timing and the opaque nature of the transaction strongly suggest it was a payoff. A payoff for Mr. Harrison's special directive to illegally reassign my client's parcel ID, clearing the way for this fraudulent land grab. The court was silent. Malcolm Thorne looked utterly defeated. Ms. Vance's face was a mask of professional desperation. The intricate web of deceit, the phantom, John Doe, the manipulated county records, the backdated quitclaim, the compromised notary, and now the exposed corruption within the county itself. It all unraveled before the court's eyes. In her closing argument, Melissa delivered a powerful, concise summary. She painted Malcolm Thorne and Reginald Vance not as visionary developers, but as ruthless criminals who had systematically conspired to steal private property through an elaborate scheme of forged documents and corrupted public officials. She spoke of the shattered dream, the desecrated land, and the fundamental breach of trust in the legal system. She urged the judge to not only return my land but to send a clear message that such predatory practices would not be tolerated. Ms. Vance, in her closing, tried to salvage what was left. She argued that Miller's testimony was speculative, that the financial analysis was circumstantial, and that the HOA had acted in good faith based on what they believed were legitimate public records. She tried to shift blame onto me, suggesting my extended absence from the property indicated a lack of commitment, almost as if I had invited the theft. But her arguments were weak, her confidence gone, as the weight of the evidence crushed her every point. The judge retired to consider the verdict. The waiting period was agonizing. Every phone call made me jump. I found myself driving back to the valley, stopping just outside the resort gate. The construction was halted by the temporary injunction, but the luxury cabin still stood, a grim monument to the injustice. The silence was back, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet I remembered. It was an eerie, hollow silence, filled with the ghosts of what had been. When Melissa called a week later, her voice was calm, but I could hear the triumph. "The judge has ruled, Mr. Peterson. The verdict is in." I drove to her office, my heart pounding. Melissa met me at the door, a genuine smile on her face. "We won, completely. The judge found overwhelmingly in your favor." She handed me the lengthy court order. The judge had declared the Last Pine Homeowners Association's deed to my 100 acres null and void, returning full, rightful ownership to me. He had found clear and convincing evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and deliberate manipulation of county records by Malcolm Thorne and Reginald Vance through their various entities. The judge ordered the Last Pine Homeowners Association, Malcolm Thorne, and Reginald Vance to pay me substantial damages, including the fair market value of my destroyed cabin, the costs of attempting to restore the land, acknowledging full restoration was impossible, and all my legal fees. Critically, he also referred the case to the State Attorney General's office for a full criminal investigation into fraud, conspiracy, and public corruption charges against Thorne, Vance, and Mr. Harrison. The HOA, as a legal entity, was effectively annihilated by the judgment. I sat there, the words blurring on the page. The land was mine. Thorne, Vance, and their entire corrupt enterprise were facing utter destruction, both financially and criminally. The HOA, built on deceit, was dismantled. Justice had been served in the most complete legal sense. There would be no gentle resolution, no return to the simple peace I once knew. Just a long, difficult road of trying to reclaim a place that could never truly be whole again. Seriously, what in the actual backwoods is this? An entire resort just appears on someone's land? The sheer brazenness of these developers is stomach-turning. They roll in, obliterate decades of someone's life, and then have the gall to call him a trespasser. This isn't just about land. It's about a fundamental disrespect for individual rights and personal property. These HOA types think they could just steamroll over anyone not connected to their little golf cart clique. Thorne and Vance deserve every bit of legal hell coming their way, and, frankly, a lot more. This is why HOAs are the absolute worst, power-hungry, entitled dictators with too much money and zero morals. Absolutely disgusting. This story hit me right in the gut. He didn't just lose land. He lost his sanctuary, his entire retirement dream. That cabin, off-grid, built with his own hands over 2 decades, erased. And replaced with 24 cookie-cutter luxury boxes and the hum of AC units? That detail alone is pure agony. The quiet, the wilderness, the peace he worked his whole life for, obliterated by corporate greed. And then they try to silence his witness with a dead rabbit? This isn't just a legal battle. It's a fight for his soul. And honestly, the fact that even after winning, the place is permanently scarred, that's the real kicker. There's no truly happy ending when your life's dream is desecrated. This HOA and everyone involved in this twisted plot robbed him of something far more valuable than property. His peace of mind and the future he envisioned. It's a tragedy disguised as a legal victory. Glad he won, but let's be real, it's a completely hollow victory. He got his land back, sure, and the bad guys are facing consequences, which is something. But his sanctuary is gone forever. It's not a pristine wilderness anymore. It's a scarred, developed landscape with a bunch of ugly luxury cabins still sitting on it. You can't unring that bell. The quiet, the solitude, the feeling of the place, it's all been replaced by the ghostly echoes of a resort. He got justice, but he lost his dream. The HOA might be destroyed, but the damage they inflicted on that specific piece of land, and on the narrator's spirit, is irreversible. It's a stark reminder that even when you win the legal battle, some things are broken beyond repair. No amount of damages can bring back what was truly stolen.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.